Hello, History of Economic Society community. As I'm recording this video, it's nearly 6 p.m. here in Brazil, so good evening. My name is Cruz Silva. I'm an assistant lecturer at State University of Ponta Grossa, and I'm very glad to participate in this online version of the AGS conference. The paper I'm going to present is called The Making of Index Numbers in the Early 1920s, a closer look at the Fisher-Mitchell debate. And I'm writing this paper in co-authorship with Professor Felipe Almeida from Federal University of Paraná. This is still a working paper, so we would really appreciate any comments you might have that help us strengthen this research. Our paper explores the discussions regarding index numbers in the early 1920s, when the axiomatic approach to index numbers became the dominant approach to the subject. The main point in disputing this controversy was the existence of a universally valid formula for index numbers, and several prominent individuals took part in these discussions. Most notably Irving Fisher and Wesley Mitchell, but also Warren Persons, Correa Walsh, and Allyn Young. Our objective in the work is to revisit this debate and to highlight the contrasting positions involved in it. And the main argument we developed throughout the papers that the dispute regarding an ideal formula for index numbers between Fisher and Mitchell is actually a product of their broader idea about economics as a science. On this matter, the correspondence exchange between them will prove really useful, as it will allow us to have a closer look at their conception of economics as a scientific discipline. In order to understand this debate, to situate it historically, it is necessary first to keep in mind that the first decades of the 20th century in American economics were marked by a pluralism in economic academia. And that's what allowed both Fisher and Mitchell to occupy the highest ranks in the discipline, that despite their very dissonant perspectives. Both of them, for example, presided the American Economic Association, the American Statistical Association, and the Econometric Society. Also, in relation to the 1920s specifically, their importance to the discipline is attested by acknowledging they were the most cited economists in the topics of business cycles and monetary theory in that decade, as this table extracted from Deutscher, 1990, illustrates. So, that said, the debate our paper scrutinizes began with the 1920 annual meeting of the American Statistical Association, an event in which Fisher promoted his first systematic defense of the so-called Fisher's ideal formula for index numbers, a formula that would supersede all others in its capacity to satisfy a series of statistical tests. Fisher identified that the best formula for index numbers was the geometric mean between Lasper's index number and Paaschi's index number, and had this presentation discussed by Mitchell, Persons, and Walsh. Already in this first round of the discussion, Walsh sided with Fisher, while Mitchell and Persons remained critical to Fisher's idea. Their criticisms were not aimed at the formula Fisher had singled out as the best one, but addressed the very idea that a universal formula for index numbers was even possible. Their divergence, therefore, did not rely on technical specifications, but on contrasting understandings of economics as a science. As Fisher's paper was still incomplete at the 1920 meeting, the debates triggered by his proposal led him to extend his planned paper into his book, The Making of Index Numbers, which he published in 1922, and whose main concern was the uncritical use of index numbers, as it covered as many formulas as possible in order to choose the most appropriate one. Fisher could not conceive that since an index formula is an instrument, the index number formulas varied according to the purpose involved in their use. He argued that this would be like changing the formula of the coefficient of correlation to fit specific applications. Hence, through a relentless process of elimination through testing, he sought the best formula, and by best formula, he meant the one capable of providing the most accurate result. The outcome of his selection process led him once again to restate the geometric mean between Lasper's index number and Paaschi's index number, the so-called Fisher's index number. His formula was, according to him, the best one available, and therefore the ideal formula for index numbers. Already in the preface of his book, Fisher placed Mitchell as in partial disagreement with him. And this is a statement we cannot agree with, because the disagreement between them was too fundamental to be qualified simply as partial, especially if we consider Mitchell's reception to Fisher's idea of universality. In his 1921 reactions to Fisher's proposal, Mitchell stressed that Fisher held the position that an index number is itself a purpose, while he, Mitchell, uh, saw a need for differentiation between the many types of formulas, each with their clearly defined uses. Mitchell believed then that index numbers should depart from they should start with their purposes and thereupon consider the methods appropriate for each use. Mitchell's opinion on index numbers is especially relevant in this regard because it mattered a great deal for Fisher, and an illustration of this is the fact that Mitchell's 1921 publications were not the only reactions of Mitchell to Fisher's theory of index numbers. There is further evidence on Mitchell's archival material kept by Columbia University libraries. As Fisher made extensive use of his personal contacts with prominent students of index numbers in the composition of his book, he invited Mitchell for a conference on index numbers in the summer of 1921. The objective of this conference was to discuss Fisher's ongoing work on index numbers, which would later become his 1922 book. Mitchell could not attend the conference, but Fisher managed to send him a draft of the manuscript in November of that year. Mitchell replied to Fisher's consultation in February 1922, 3 months after Fisher sent him the draft. And in his reply, Mitchell complimented Fisher for his work and anticipated the impact the book would probably have on the field of index numbers. Following that acknowledgement, however, Mitchell stressed 3 concerns regarding the book's content. First, Mitchell remarked that Pigou, in his Economics of Welfare, had developed an index number identical to Fisher's ideal formula. Second, Mitchell recommended that Fisher should check Frederick Macaulay's article entitled Making and Using of Index Numbers for technical remarks regarding chain relatives. And third, and most importantly here for us, Mitchell restated that, and I quote here, "I wish that you would set yourself to think about the different uses to which index numbers, even of wholesale prices, are applied." Mitchell wanted then to make Fisher consider the different purposes an index number might serve and how this could demand different formulas. His efforts in this sense were in vain, though, as Fisher's reply acknowledged both Pigou's and Macaulay's contributions, but remained silent in relation to the different applications and purposes of index numbers. And this is what defines the fundamental disagreement between Fisher and Mitchell regarding index numbers. Fisher privileged an all-purpose approach, while Mitchell took the different possible applications of index numbers as a sine qua non for the definition of the formula to be used. We associate this disagreement with their distinct backgrounds and views on economics as a science. And on this regard, a 1926 letter exchange between them is illuminating. Fisher sent to Mitchell a carbon copy of his November 9 letter to Wilford King, in which he claimed Mitchell was mistaken on the question referring to the idea of normal prices and Fisher's transitional periods and periods of equilibrium. Mitchell replied 4 days later and restated that no historical period is ever normal. And here I think it's worth quoting Mitchell again, as he says that when dealing with statistical materials, are we not always dealing with transitional periods? And when you speak of periods of equilibrium, are you referring again to imaginary conditions instead of the historical conditions which statistics reflect? As such, Mitchell reinforced his disbelief in the existence of equilibrium periods in history, grounding such disbelief on the available data. Fisher replied to Mitchell's remarks on November 26, relating historical and scientific truths. For Fisher, scientific truth is conditional and historical truth is always absolute, because historical facts give us the means we need to understand the conditional connections that constitute science, while scientific truth allows for both the explanation and the forecast of historical facts. For Fisher, then, a historical fact comes from many scientific relationships, but when one or a few relationships predominate, the historical fact approaches the scientific law. He then chose Kepler's law regarding the elliptic motion of planets to illustrate his point, because for him, this law did not dictate that planets move in ellipses, but that they would do so indeed, if nothing but the force of the sun acted upon them. So Fisher claimed that a theory simply represents what would occur under certain conditions, which are never entirely fulfilled. Therefore, the more the period is transitional, the higher is the prevalence of existing perturbations, and consequently, the less are the theoretical conditions fulfilled. In this sense, Fisher believed that theories merely depicted tendencies, and that equilibrium was an imaginary feature. Now, as previously stated, American economics in the 1920s was marked by pluralism, so much so that no hegemonic perspective ruled over Fisher and Mitchell's disagreement on index numbers. This feature had been present in the American Academy also before the 1920s, as the scrutiny of Fisher's and Mitchell's formation clarifies. The whole environment that led from their instruction to the 1920s was then enclosed in the coexistence of several approaches and conditioned their particular views on the subject. Fisher was a purebred Yale scholar who studied under William Graham Sumner and Josiah Willard Gibbs, and had his interest in economics related to the mathematical character of the discipline, as he contributed to the fields of general equilibrium analysis, index number theory, monetary economics, and econometrics. So Fisher brought mathematics and Newtonian mechanics into economics, criticizing social Darwinism and advocating laissez-faire. It is not difficult to understand, therefore, why Fisher relied on the law of elliptic motion of planets, a markedly Newtonian perspective, as an accurate illustration for his view of science. Concepts such as normal prices and equilibrium are also based on a Newtonian approach to economics, as in Fisher's explanation of transitional periods, periods of equilibrium, and levels of fulfillment. The same mechanical approach to economics can be found in Fisher's view of history, which he saw as a means to build theoretical approaches capable of explaining and forecasting future facts. For Fisher, the theoretical approach that endures hence becomes a law, and this idea dominated his approach to index numbers. Mitchell, on the other hand, was brought up into economics at the University of Chicago, where he studied under Thorstein Veblen and was influenced by individuals like John Dewey and Jack Loeb. Unlike Fisher, Mitchell was exposed to a large social science perspective, which rendered his economic analysis free from theoretical preconceptions, as facts were much more important than the theories involved in the construction. Mitchell fathomed that different societies and different times implied in different economic structures, so the understanding of different economic realities might demand different economic data. In this sense, Mitchell's background can be indicated as what conditioned his criticisms to Fisher's ideal formula, because if reality was circumstantial, index number formulas could not be universal. As such, our point here is that the 1920s American pluralism in economics is an important element to understand the different methodological perspectives on index numbers during the early 1920s. So, in conclusion, the debate this paper analyzes had at its center the names of Fisher and Mitchell. It opposed not only two different interpretations of index numbers, but two different conceptions of economics as a science. We argue, therefore, that with Fisher and Mitchell as the most prominent representatives of the controversy, the disagreement these individuals presented on the making of index numbers were actually subsidiary to their dissonant understandings of economics. Fisher privileged mathematics and Newtonian mechanics in his theories, while Mitchell's compass pointed to a large social science perspective, privileging empiricism to the detriment of abstract theories. The same notions ruled over their debate on the making of index numbers. So that's pretty much all I had to say about our research. I'm sorry I had to rush through a rather intricate subject. I had only 15 minutes that are now ending. I hope you enjoyed the presentation somehow. Again, we would really appreciate any comments or questions regarding our work. So please feel free to contact us about anything. Thank you for your attention. Be safe. Hope we can all be together soon discussing our ideas.